Here's what happened when I remade this little drawing. I simply drew Sky some clouds and drew Talking Strike getting healed by the healing wand. And here's the final version. Here's what happened when I remade this little drawing. So I drew some trees and clouds in the background, and then I drew a Pell in the background just to add a cooler vibe to it. And then of course I drew out the drone itself. And here's how it ended up. I like it quite a bit. Here's what happened when I remade this little drawing. I drew a nice ocean background and it ended up looking pretty nice, but then the character looked pretty bad because this was one of the first cards I ever made. Yeah, I drew that when I was learning the app, so whenever my skills got better, I completely remade it and it looked pretty nice. And here's the old versus the new version. Here's what happened when I remade this little drawing. So I drew a little backyard for the background because that's better than just some random hills. I drew some trees and a rock slide going into a pool. And then I drew Subra, which was the easiest part actually. It took me pretty quick. And this is the final version. Here's how they look side by side. Here's what happened when I remade this little drawing. I simply drew the sun setting, some trees with some leaves falling from them, and then I drew Cove just sitting in front of them. And here's how it turned out, and then here's a side-by-side comparison. Here's what happened when I remade this little drawing. So I drew a really simple cave background with some rocks hanging from the roof. Then I added a little bit of water dripping, and then I drew a bat next to it. And here's how it ended up looking. And here's the old versus the new version. Here's what happened when I remade this little drawing. Pretty simple. I drew a hill, some trees, a sign that says no swimming, and I drew crocodile swimming in a little river. And it was actually pretty tough to draw crocodile in the river. I don't know why. And here's how the final version looks. And of course, we got the old versus the new version. These drawings are pretty cool, right? You know what else is cool? The sponsor of today's video, which is Fearless Fighters. Yep, my card game is finally for sale. So if you want to get yourself some booster packs, check out the link in the pinned comment. I hope you all enjoy because I've worked really hard on it. And if you get one of these 3 cards, well, consider yourself very lucky. Okay, back to the video. Here's what happened when I remade this little drawing. So for any of y'all who don't know, this is the first card I ever made actually, so it ended up looking really bad. Well, actually, the background is pretty good, but the character looked really bad, so I completely redrew him, and then we ended up with this, which looked pretty nice. And here's the side-by-side comparison. Here's what happened when I remade this little drawing. This is like one of the last cards I made, so I had no good background idea, so I just drew a giant wave, and then I drew Super Goose Stick in front of it. And that wave is really gonna mess him up. Here's the final version of Super Goose Stick. Here's the old version versus the new version. Here's what happened when I remade this little drawing. So I drew a Super Trappage first, which took a while, but it wasn't too hard, and then I drew a city background and added some rain and lightning, just for a little bit less of a plain vibe. And I like how the lightning strike ended up looking, honestly. So here's the final version of Super Trappage. Here's the old version versus the new version. Here's what happened when I remade this little drawing. Alright, so this is literally the second card I ever drew. The background ended up pretty good actually, but the character looked really bad. Well, better than bad, but still pretty bad. So a couple months later, I updated it and it ended up looking good. Here's the final version of the Chompy card. Here's the old versus the new version. Here's what happened when I remade this little drawing. So of course I went for the style of a dark, scary graveyard. I drew a full moon, some clouds, some trees, some graves, and of course Skulton himself. Here's a final version of Skulton. Here's the old drawing versus the new version. Here's what happened when I remade this old drawing. So I drew basic ocean wavy background with Dolphy and it just going after a little fish. And yeah, that was pretty much it. Here's the final version of Dolphy. Here's the old drawing versus the new version. Here's what happened when I remade this old drawing. So I added just a pretty basic tree background with a little bit of a stormy vibe to it. And of course I drew the ground and a little sign. Then I drew Krupsar himself sticking up from the ground. Here's the final version of Krupsar. Here's the old card versus the new final card. This is what happened when I remade this old drawing. I started with drawing Super Fyro himself with him breathing some fire. And then I drew a bit of a damaged building in the background with a helicopter and a plane next to it. Here's a final version of Super Fyro. Here's how the old version looks next to the new version. This is what happened when I remade this old drawing. So I just drew a large fence with some bushes and a sign in front of it. And then I just drew Tinosaur eating one of the berries off the bush. Here's a final version of Tinosaur. Here's the old versus the new version. Here's what happened when I remade this old drawing. I made this one pretty simple. Just drew Octan under a rock underwater and there's a little bit of a seaweed behind him. Here's how it ended up looking. Here's the old versus the new version. Here's what happened when I remade this old card. So I just simply drew some clouds and the sun in the background. And then of course drawing Super Krika would be the hardest part. But this didn't take too long, so I just drew some legs, antenna, some claws, and stuff like that. Here's a final version of Super Krika. Here's the old drawing versus the new drawing. Here's what happened when I remade the old Spida card. So I just drew a pretty basic house in the background with a fence next to it. And then of course I drew Spida and put the tree in his mouth like the old drawing had. Here's a final version of Spida. And this is the old card versus the new card. This is what happened when I remade this old drawing. So I drew a cracking mountain in the background with some fire on it. For some reason this took a while to do, and then I drew Super Spidey Sect, which took a really long time. I don't know, just the shape he had took so long to draw. This was one of the longest times it ever took me to make a card. And after all that work, we ended up with this. And here's a side-by-side comparison. Here's what happened when I remade this old drawing. So I copied the thing from the old drawing with that little village on top of the hill. And then I drew a little sign in a tree. And then I drew Spidar himself with a web tangled around the tree. And here's the final version of Spidar. Here's the old versus the new version. Here's what happened when I remade this old drawing. So I drew a ground with a pretty large hole in it and some trees and rocks on it. it. And then I drew Dixel himself sitting in the hole. Here's how the final version of Dixel ended up looking. Here's the old versus the new version. Here's what happened when I remade this whole drawing. So I completely scratched the boring idea of drawing a tree background. I drew a boat with a little light on the ocean, then just drew Corba standing on top of it. Here's how it ended up looking. Here's the old card versus the new card. Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed this compilation of shorts. I post shorts like this daily, so stay tuned if you want to see those. I'll probably make 2 a day if they start getting more views also. Be sure to join the Fierce Fighters Discord server if you want to be part of the community. Please, the server is so dead, we need more active members. Anyway, see you on the next one, which should actually be right here in front of your face.